Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today we are continuing on with the 2025 year-end list season. And today it is the big one. It is the main year-end list that I'm doing, my top 50 favorite albums that have come out in 2025. And I know that most normal people would just do a top 10 or maybe a top 20, but I decided to just go all in and do 50 of my favorite albums that came out this year, given that that's just how many I feel the need to do to accurately represent all of the music that's come out this year that I've enjoyed. Just with how much fantastic music I've listened to this year and how much more I still want to have the chance to get round to, which I will probably manage to do in the early months of 2026. And even then, 50 albums isn't quite cutting it to represent everything that I have loved that's come out this year, but I think that any more than that would just be a little bit excessive. And so I will just put some honorable mentions on the screen now, other albums that have come out this year that I have really enjoyed that I think are still absolutely worth your time to check out, but just ones that I didn't enjoy quite enough to put on my main top 50, but all of these albums I would still highly recommend them. I think this list and how I'm going to go through it is pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to go through the first maybe half of the list reasonably quickly, and then from there on I'm going to start going into more detail as we get into the higher entries. So with that being said, let's start off the list at number 50 with Ancient Death and their debut album Ego Dissolution, which I think is a really solid debut effort from this new death metal band that I've really enjoyed. Lots of great vocals, lots of great guitar riffs. And then at number 49, I've got the Alex G album Headlights, which is just a really nice, heartfelt little folk album I've really been enjoying this year. At number 48, I have the new Architects album, which I think is a great comeback after a couple of slightly more disappointing releases, and I think that they are mostly back on form with this one, as it does kind of see them just going back to what I think made a lot of their previous albums so good. Next up, we have the second album from The Last Dinner Party, From the Pyre, which the more I listen to it, the more I start to notice a lot of little details in it that I absolutely love, and it has grown on me a lot since I initially reviewed it. I think that it's as good as their debut in terms of both writing, performances, vocals, and just all around is fantastic. Then at number 46, I have Tyler the Creator with Don't Tap the Glass, which is just such a fun and groovy pop, hip-hop dance album. And as much as I obviously do love a lot of his much more conceptual work like Igor or Call Me If You Get Lost, I think that there is just something so fun about this, and I think he still does it so well. Next up, I have the Lure Collider album, Sin Shaky Sunbelt Princess, which is just a really cool and almost psychedelic post-rock album that I have really enjoyed. Despite it being so short, I think it suits the style really well. And then at number 44, I have Earl Sweatshirt with Live Laugh Love, which I think is just one of the most fun and unique abstract hip-hop albums I've heard in quite a while. It has their very typical Earl Sweatshirt kind of style. It's very witty, it's very fast, and I think all around is just one of his best albums. Then I have Obong Jaya with Paradise Now, which I think is again just such a fun and groovy Afrobeats album, lots of elements of soul and pop in there that I just absolutely love. And then I've also got the Utoral album Superposition, which I think is just such an incredible synth pop release from them. Just has so many incredible moments, lots of great standout songs, and really great riffs too. Next at number 41, I have La Dispute with No One Was Driving the Car. I think again another fantastic comeback album from them, and I think that they are back on form with the typical style of post-hardcore that I would want to hear from them, with again fantastic riffs, incredibly passionate vocals, and just all around such a good album from La Dispute. Coming into the top 40, I now have White Lies with Nightlight. Again, just I think a fantastic blend of post-punk and synth-pop and new wave, and just all of the genres that they put so well together. And I think this album definitely features some of their best writing and some absolutely fantastic and killer riffs as well. Then we've also got the new Quadeca album, which is one that continues to see him improving and refining his style, further removing himself from the very early stages of SoundCloud rap that he was involved with in his early career, and then going into a much more folk and indie and art pop direction, which I think just suits him so incredibly well. At number 38, I then have Viagra Boys with Viagra Boys, with somewhat of a self-titled album, I suppose, which I think is just such a fantastic and fun dance punk, post-punk album from them. This album, in my opinion, is on par with Cave World for just how fun and groovy it is, and still features, I think, some of their best and wittiest moments. Next up, I have Spelling with Portrait of My Heart, which is just such a fantastic and very immersive and atmospheric art pop album that has so many unique ideas and styles, and of course fantastic vocals from Spelling herself. Next up at number 36, I have John Michael Michael and Anthony James with their new collaboration project Ego Trip, which I just find to be such a soulful and smooth and in a way almost wholesome hip-hop album with such fantastic vocals and such incredible and smooth production. And then at number 35, I have the new 21 Pilots album Breach, which I think is just a really good conclusion to the story and the lore that's been going on with them over the last few years. And on top of that, I think performance-wise, I think they're still on form with this, as there are still many standout tracks from this album that I think are among my absolute favorites by them. Then I, of course, have the new Florence and the Machine album, Everybody Scream. I think is just such a powerhouse of an album, as you would expect from its title. It definitely lives up to that, which, as you would expect, features some incredibly passionate vocals, and just all around the way this album is performed is one of Florence and the Machine's absolute best. Next, at number 33, I have the Squid album Cowards, which is one I've really enjoyed. Their typical blend of art punk and post-punk is as good as ever, but when they start incorporating very minor elements of post-rock into the mix as well, this album just sees them taking a whole new direction, and one that I have really enjoyed hearing on this one and hope that they continue to expand on with future projects. Then coming in at number 32, I have Darkside with their new album Nothing, which is one I've really enjoyed, and I think this is definitely one of their most atmospheric releases yet. It's just so chill, so moody, and has so many fantastic moments, a lot of great electronic arrangements, and great vocals as well. The next one is one I'm relieved that I've enjoyed as much as I did, given how awful her last album was, which is, of course, Lord's Virgin. I think that this album sees her not only going back to her very unique style of pop that I've always enjoyed, but also on a lyrical level, it's so much more mature and profound than anything that was on Solar Power. Then I, of course, have the new Freddie Gibbs and the Alchemist album Alfredo 2, which I have enjoyed listening to so much. I think this is better than Alfredo 1, in my opinion. I think the production is better, the writing is better, the rapping is better, and just all around, this has just been such a great album that I've enjoyed a lot this year. Then coming in at number 29, definitely one of the most fun albums I've listened to that I only really discovered right at the end of the year, which is, of course, Gorilla Toss's You're Weird Now. I think that this is just such a fun mix of psychedelia and dance punk, and even some slight electronic elements in there as well. I think that on the whole, this is by far one of the most fun and enjoyable albums on that level that I've listened to this year. Next, I have the new Natalia Lafourcade album, Cancionera, which I find to be definitely one of her moodiest and most atmospheric releases so far. I think there is also just such a wide range of styles on this album. You have a lot of more stripped back moments, a lot of much more grand and epic moments as well, but all of that is done in her usual folk style, which I think she pulls off seamlessly on just about every song this album has to offer. At 27, I have the Callous Cowboys with I Don't Want to See You in Heaven, which I think is such an incredible and really passionate metalcore album, which is not typically the kind of style you would expect from this genre, but they actually do it so well. And again, despite this album being an almost hour-long metalcore project, it's something that they managed to pull off so well, and I think it definitely makes it one of the most unique albums in the genre that I've heard, not only this year, but just ever, as a lot of it is just a lot more mature and a lot more profound than you would usually expect from typical metalcore releases. And then rounding off the bottom half of the list, I have the Preservation and Gabe Hernandez album, which is one that I have enjoyed a lot. Again, one that I didn't discover until quite near the end of the year, which is why I didn't get the chance to review it, but I absolutely love the blend of abstract hip-hop and slightly more experimental hardcore stuff in there as well. I think the rapping is absolutely on point, obviously very MF Doom influence, which I think is cool, as well as just some of the production as well. Feels very bare bones, but in a way that they managed to pull off so well, and I think suits the style of the album perfectly. And so starting things off, in the top 25, the top half of the list, we first have King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with Phantom Island. I think this is just one of their most fun and playful releases they've ever done. I love the orchestral elements, the jam elements. I think on the whole, this album is just impossible to not have a good time while listening to it. It's just so incredibly fun. And despite that, I think there are still a lot of really unique moments, the various different genres they have on this album as well. There are even elements of soul in the mix, which shouldn't work, but they managed to pull it off so well. Next up, I have Ethel Cain with Wilby Tucker, I Will Always Love You, which sees her continuing the kind of direction she took on her Perverts EP earlier in the year, as she kind of goes further into drone and ambient and slowcore music. And I think that by far this is my favorite project of hers that she's done, as I think it's her darkest, her moodiest, her most atmospheric, and it really does show her further continuing the sound that she established on Perverts, and I think takes it to just a whole new level. Next, at number 23, I have Balloonerism by Mac Miller, which I think is just an absolutely devastating and almost gut-wrenching and harrowing posthumous release from him, given that a lot of this album was recorded around 2013-14, that kind of era, which was a good few years before he died. And then you look at some of the lyrics on this album, the amount of stuff he got right about his own death is almost disturbing the way it's presented, as well as just how moody and emotional and atmospheric so many of the songs are. It really does make this one of the most unique and just one of the most incredible posthumous albums I've ever heard. Next, at number 22, I have the new Clipping album Dead Channel Sky, which in some ways is still a very typical Clipping release, just that kind of experimental industrial hip-hop, but the way that they incorporate elements of breakbeat and dance music and other genres of electronic is absolutely amazing, and I think makes this one of the most unique hip-hop albums I've listened to this year, and definitely obviously one of my favorites, as there are just so many incredible and groovy moments, and there's even a darkness to this, but in like a really cool way is the best way I can describe it. At my number 21 spot, I have Mike with Showbiz. I think this is just, again, such a fun and interesting and really unique abstract hip-hop album. It's incredibly dense as well. It's one of those where every time I listen to it, I notice at least a handful more details that I didn't on previous listens. And even with this being one of the earliest releases of the year, I still come back to it occasionally and just notice a handful of other things that I appreciate about it. And it's one that I think in the future I will continue to go back to it, and even then I will probably still discover more things about it that make me appreciate it. And coming in at my number 20 spot, I have Jane Remover with Revenge Seekers, which I find to easily be her best album so far. I think the writing on this is incredible, the performances are incredible, and it also has some of the absolute best features I've heard on any album this year, as well as just all around the production on this album is fantastic, and from start to finish it is just fun, it is groovy, it is just everything you would want out of a modern, I guess, electronic, hyperpop, hip-hop-ish kind of album. The next album on my list is the new Candelabro album, which I have just been enjoying so much. I think that this album has some of the best and most passionate vocal performances I've heard in quite a while, and instrumentally as well, this album is so dense and there is just so much going on. It's obviously very kind of Black Country New Road inspired, to the point where I'd say that if you don't like the new direction that they are taking, this is the album to be listening to, as the amount of just windmill scene influence in general on this album is so prominent, and I think that they use that influence so well. Next, at number 18, I have the FKA Twigs album Eusexua, and I love on how this album, she takes a very different direction, kind of distancing herself a little bit from the art pop of her first couple of albums, and instead going for an almost kind of EDM, and in moments even trance kind of direction, and I think it's a style that she's already doing incredibly well, and one that I'm hoping to see her perfect even further on future projects. But I do still love how the typical art pop is still somewhat present on this album, and I think the way she blends the styles is absolutely amazing. Next up, I have the new Honningbana album Soft Spot, which I think is just such an insane, raw, punchy powerhouse of a punk album. This is just one of the absolute most unhinged hardcore punk albums I've heard in quite a while, as well as just a lot of the elements of noise rock and even a bit of kind of post-hardcore to give it a more melodic feel is just absolutely insane. And even though this album never stops or calms down at any point, it's only just over half an hour long, and I think it suits that kind of length perfectly with the kind of style that it goes for. Next, at number 16, I of course could not go without mentioning the new Clips album Let God Sort 'Em Out, which I think is just such an incredible comeback after Clips having obviously broken up quite a few years ago at this point, as I think that both Pusha T and Malice are absolutely on form with some of their best rapping, their best lyrics so far as well as obviously having Pharrell on production. He just does such an amazing job at every single song, as all of them are just so smooth and well put together, but not overly polished. There's still an underlying grittiness to this album. I think it's incredible. A lot of the features are also amazing, and I think are some of the best moments in a lot of the songs is when the featured artist is the one one singing. Next, I have the Weather Day album, Hornet Disaster. I think definitely my favorite Weather Day album so far. This album is just so dense, so passionate, and I think as far as emo and post-hardcore goes, this has to be definitely my favorite album of the year, as the vocal performances are just some of the most amazing and passionate I've heard in the genre in quite a while, as well as the instrumental performances being absolutely on point, and I think a big part of the reason why this album's length works so well, because despite its incredible density and how much there is going on at any given point on this album, despite the fact that it's over an hour long, the performances are really what carry it for that whole length. Next on the list, I of course have the Rosalia album Lux, which I have loved so much. I think again, incredibly dense project, one that took quite a lot of listens to fully digest, but once you do get to know it and you can appreciate it on the level of the production is incredible, the vocals are incredible, and again, some absolutely fantastic features that in some parts really do carry a lot of songs. I do just love how smooth this album is, how well put together everything is, and each song just flowing in and out of each other so perfectly. And it does just make it, I think, one of the most complete and well put together, polished albums I've heard this year. Next, at number 13, this list of course would not be complete without the new Billy Woods album, which I think is just absolutely one of his most well put together and again dense projects so far, which is saying a lot because this man can pack a hell of a lot into an album, and I think this is still one of his most complete works yet, as I think this album features some of his best poetry as well as some of his best rapping, and even in some moments the way that he presents certain themes and styles is almost disturbing and makes you quite uncomfortable while listening to it, as he does discuss a lot of very difficult subjects on this album, but in a way that makes you not want to stop listening. The next album is, of course, have to have the new Deftones album Private Music at number 12. I think that Deftones are continuing to prove themselves to be a band who simply cannot miss, as even 30 years into their career, they're still releasing some of their absolute best and most complete material. As this album does feature some of their best and most memorable moments, the vocals are on point, the guitar riffs are just quite like nothing I've ever heard from them before, and this truly is just one of their most passionate releases so far, and still continues to prove them to be one of the most unique and interesting bands in modern metal, and just metal in general, as there really is just nothing else quite like this album that I've heard this year. And then just outside of the top 10, I have Geese with Getting Killed. I think this is absolutely my favorite Geese album so far. It's the one where I really kind of started to understand why people love this band so much, as I did like their first two albums, but nowhere near on the same level as on this one. I think that this album has so many incredible standout tracks. I think all of them are so well written and performed. Cameron Winter's vocals are just quite like nothing I've ever heard from him before, as I think this is just as good as his solo album from last year. And I think that there are many tracks on this album, particularly some of the ones towards the end, that have some of the most passionate and euphoric and really beautiful moments that really are career-defining songs for this band. And it really does give me hope that they could expand on this even further and have another album in the future even higher on my list. And so now, going into the top 10, the first album I have here is Heremic with Seeking Darkness, which is just such an amazing, incredible, and really beautiful and atmospheric post-rock album. Elements of noise rock in there as well, which I absolutely love. Obviously, you kind of have that shoegaze leaning element, which is what Paranol always did really well, and now under the name Heremic, still absolutely killing it with other genres too. This is one that, despite the general nature of post-rock as a genre and the fact that this album is so atmospheric, it's again incredibly dense, and at any given point there really is just a lot to say about what's going on. And I think as well, I love the mostly instrumental focus that this album has, as it really does just kind of show how incredibly well put together a lot of the instrumental performances are, as well as just how well written every moment is and how much thought has been put into every song this album has. Next, at number 9, I have Nina Giraci with I Love My Computer. I think that this is just one of the most amazing and fun debut albums that's come out this year, but despite how fun and groovy this entire album is, it manages to pull that style off without having to sacrifice being quite profound as well, as when you look at the lyrics in a bit more detail, she does discuss a lot of really important topics. She reminisces about her childhood and talks about the future of technology. And she's talking about all of these topics all the while some of the most amazing and fun and well-produced electronic music is playing, and all around I think this album is just so unique, and easily I would say this is my favorite electronic album of the year. Then at my number 8 spot I have McKinley Dixon with Magic Alive. I think this is an absolutely career-defining album for him, and almost I would go so far as to say that for jazz rap in general, this is already going to go down as a genre-defining album, as I think this features some of the absolute best production that the genre has to offer, as well as some absolutely incredible rapping and really interesting and at times witty lyricism. And so because of that, I think that there are just so many levels on which you can enjoy this album, from the amazing lyrics to the super smooth instrumentals and production, and obviously all of the jazz influences, the jazz sounds, everything on that level is also just absolutely top notch. Next, at my number 7 spot, I have Model Actress with Pirouette. I think that this is just such an interesting and unique kind of post-industrial, I suppose, kind of album is the best genre label I can think to describe it, because it is quite hard to pin down. I love how mechanical a lot of the sounds and instruments are, and as well as the very gritty and raw vocals. And even then, moving away from the sound, you look at the lyrics, and there is a lot of very personal and profound stuff being discussed there as well. And I really do love the contrast from the very raw and dark and mechanical sound to the much more personal and vulnerable lyrics. And I just think that on the whole, it suits the style of the album surprisingly well and does make it definitely one of the most unique but still amazing albums I've heard this year. Number 6, I have the self-titled album by Racing Mount Pleasant, which again, very heavy, very strong windmill scene influence on this project, and I think that they are able to use that influence so well, as there is a very strong element of post-rock as well on this thing, making it so atmospheric, so moody, and on the whole is just such an amazing vibe from start to finish, as I really do find there to be so many amazing and very passionate moments that this album has, more so than a lot of other windmill scene stuff I've heard. And now moving into the top 5, I first have Ichiko Aoba's Luminescent Creatures. I think this is just such a beautiful and whimsical folk album that really truly does feel like an otherworldly experience to listen to. It's one that is just so soft, so smooth, and in a way really wholesome. I mean, I don't speak Japanese, so I don't know what she's saying on most of these songs, but there's still something beautiful about the way she sings, and sometimes in an almost childlike kind of voice that gives this album this sense of innocence that you wouldn't normally expect. And I just love how mysterious a lot of this album can be, as that element of whimsy is used to create that kind of atmosphere. But despite that, I think that this album is still so smooth, and despite being a kind of chamber indie folk album, I still just want to mention how fantastic the production is, which is not normally a focal point of that genre, but the entire project is just so smooth that I just have to mention how fantastic that element of it is. Next, at the number 4 spot is, of course, Deaf Heaven with their new album Lonely People with Power. This is one where, again, I would already go so far as to say that it is just a genre-defining album for black metal and post-metal, as the atmosphere on it is really quite like nothing else. The guitar riffs are so passionate, so well written, so well performed, and the vocals on top of that are just some of the most insane performances I've heard on any black metal project ever. This album just has absolutely countless moments of building up to a huge climax, and ultimately when you get there, you are hit with some of the most amazing guitar playing in the genre that is just so passionate and so heavy. And despite how many moments this album has just like that, every single one is so unique and it just never gets old. And it's one that obviously I have gone back to many times throughout the year, and it hits you just as hard every single time you hear it. Next on the list, I have Backwash with Only Dust Remains. This, I think, by far is the most passionate and unique and experimental hip-hop album I've heard this year, as again, I think there are just so many moments that hit so hard to the point where it's almost disturbing to listen to, as especially when you look at the lyrics, a lot of the social commentary that she's discussing, are some of the most raw and unhinged things, but when you really think about it, it's just all the same stuff that everyone's thinking but too afraid to say in such a bleak way. But she does sing with this real sense of frustration and pain in her voice that is really felt in how she delivers all of the vocals. And then on top of that, just the overall atmosphere, the instrumentals, everything, it's so dark, it's so moody, and it suits everything about this album absolutely perfectly. Then coming in at my number 2 spot is an album that I'm almost tempted to go back and review all over again simply because of how much it has grown on me since I initially did review it, which is, of course, Hayley Williams' Ego Death at a Bachelorette Party. I think that this is by far her best solo album so far, as despite the fact that this album is about an hour long, I think that every single song has something unique to offer that the others just don't. And I think that instrumentally, this album has so many highlights of Hayley Williams' entire solo career and just her music career in general, as well as looking at the lyrics on this album. This is by far her most deeply personal project yet, as she opens up about a lot of things that she hasn't really talked about that much in quite as much detail as she does on this album, whether that's her experience with abusive relationships or drug addiction or just general mental health. And she presents it in a way that is so personal and so hard-hitting, but still accessible to even those who can't relate personally. And in a lot of the moments that do feature some of the most hard-hitting lyrics, I think that is so perfectly reflected in the passion in her voice, the passion in the instrumentals, and on the whole, I think the pacing of this album is just absolutely perfect. It is just so incredibly well put together all around. And then finally, coming in at my number 1 spot, my 2025 album of the year, it just would have to be Maruja with Pain to Power. This is just such a fantastic and absolutely unhinged kind of, I guess, experimental jazz rock kind of project. I think that the instrumentals on this are really quite like nothing else, and it's one that at first I will admit I was skeptical given how this is their debut album. I've enjoyed a lot of their EPs in the past, and I was really intrigued to see how the sound that they established on their EPs would suit an entire full-length album that's about 50 minutes long. And despite my skepticism of that, I think that they have pulled it off absolutely perfectly, given how you still have those absolutely insane, intense, really wild, jazzy moments, but between all of that, you still have so many different parts that are much softer, much smoother, and act as a nice break between the insane parts too. And despite how hardcore and experimental and unhinged this album is sonically, when you start to look at the lyrics, it's actually really beautiful and even quite wholesome, as there are just themes of love and loving each other and accepting each other. And I think that in an album that is this insane sounding, I just absolutely love that contrast, and I just love the messaging itself anyway, regardless of how it correlates with the music. And a part of me thinks that I might regret putting this album at number 1 on the list, given that it is only their debut and who knows how incredible their next album could be. But I think that this album is absolutely still deserving of that spot, even if pretty much any of like the top 10 could actually have been at number 1. But ultimately, I think that this is just the one I found myself enjoying the most, coming back to the most, and just finding overall the most enjoyable and the most memorable of the year. And so, with all of that being said, those are my top 50 albums of 2025. I would obviously highly recommend all of them, but particularly, obviously, the ones much higher on the list being my absolute favorites. And so do let me know what your favorite albums of the year are as well. So thank you so much for watching this video. Please do let me know what you thought of these albums yourself, and please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.